Hey friends, welcome back to an episode of Let's Be Honest with John Kuhn. The views expressed in this video today are entirely my own as a private citizen and an author and an educator. They do not represent, reflect, or carry the endorsement of any public school district, school board, school administrator, or educational institution with which I'm affiliated. So politics isn't supposed to be the tribalistic spectator sport that we've allowed it to become. The truth is, it's always been a rough and tumble affair in the United States, from the caning of Charles Sumner to the duel that killed Alexander Hamilton. But I'm not talking about strenuous disagreements today. I'm trying to say that politics was never meant to be reduced to something as trivial as a daily soap opera or like a soccer match where we cheer on our side, living vicariously through our party's most eloquent politicians as they try to score points against the other team. There's too much at stake for us to reduce politics to nothing more than a game. The way I see it, politics is meant to be a mechanism for a collection of people with many different dreams and hopes and ideas and backgrounds to work together, finding consensus even in their pluralism, and establishing laws and systems that serve the best interests of the whole group of people. Do you know what politics is, speaking completely bluntly? Politics is an alternative to us killing each other in the streets to resolve our differences. As ugly as it can sometimes be, it definitely beats the alternative. But the horse race politics of our lifetime might actually be more corrosive to our unity than Hamilton's era of dishonor leading to occasional duels. We have blowhards with opinions dominating talk radio and TV airwaves, photogenic experts at little more than perpetual outrage and the deft use of logical fallacies and sophistry. We have streams of curated personalities on our phones, reinforcing what we already believe as the social media algorithms blanch opposing viewpoints completely from our minds. If we plug into politics too much, we find ourselves agitated and angry all the time, and we find our minds filled to the brim with half-truths and outright malarkey about the other side. None of that is healthy for us individually, and it's not healthy for our nation either. American political infighting is like a train crash. We just can't look away. And that means that online and broadcast agitators can monetize the kind of partisan ranting that used to be reserved for drunks on bar stools. Politics is nasty business everywhere, and I guess it always was, but I wonder if here in the US our two-party system makes it even worse than it has to be. Let me try to explain my thinking. Let's travel back to kindergarten together. Do you remember the fat pencils? Or maybe I just got those because I was special, but I remember fat pencils that let us as kindergartners rely on gross motor skills to form our letters because our fine motor skills were still under construction in our brains and in our muscles. I often think about politics and citizenship in terms of gross versus fine-grained skills of civic life. And when I think about how American politics has changed during my lifetime, starting in the early 80s when I first became conscious of politics, the word devolution instead of evolution comes to mind. It feels like we've regressed civically. I think of the famous line from W.B. Yeats, "And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born." It feels like we are slouching toward oblivion. I have a couple of bits of evidence to substantiate my admittedly dramatic take on these things. One recent study, for example, found that half of all Americans surveyed said they would personally not take action to oppose violations of democratic principles. Half. That percentage was basically the same across both parties and independents. Half of us aren't willing to stand up for representative government. And that wasn't a small group of respondents. It was 45,000 Americans. The other polls I want to refer to show that over 90% of Americans oppose resorting to violence for achieving political ends. But at the same time, 67% see violence for political ends as a growing threat. It feels like we're so subordinated to our political tribes now that our commitment to democratic principles is becoming conditional. It's not that Republicans are abandoning democracy. And it's not that Democrats are abandoning democracy. It's that apparently all of us are gradually losing our grip on the shared duties required of us for effective self-government. And this could make us ripe for tyranny. Our national immune system seems compromised right now. Our politics have become like that fat pencil. We are reduced to clumsy political thinking and a clunky national brotherhood at best. In a two-party system, you're either on this team or you're on that team, period. Those are your choices. You vote for this person or you vote for that person. That's it. You swallow this entire platform or that one. There's no avenue for fine-tuning political platforms and ideas beyond the 2 meals on the menu in front of us. No substitutions are allowed. In the absence of any practical means of fine-tuning our political ideals, many of us just adopt our party's platform lock, stock, and barrel. Slowly, we start to let the party do our thinking for us. Science has shown that we don't just join groups, we adapt to groups. None of us wants to imagine that we're conformists. In fact, we'll say we're not, but science says we all are to some extent. Human nature demands belonging, and belonging is a whole lot easier if those of us in the group agree more often than not. In a two-party world like ours, if we choose to participate in politics, there is a huge incentive to have our thoughts all gel into one or the other of the 2 molds we're presented with. And then after you choose to belong, then the party goes to work to make sure you stick around. If you're Team A, our system and our media landscape, they work together, work overtime to ensure that you understand how bad and dangerous Team B is. Once the other side is thoroughly transformed in your mind into an enemy, then you're kind of left with no choice but to start overlooking the sins of your own side. Actions and positions that you never would have accepted or endorsed before become tolerable to you. Not because you're stupid, not because you're gullible, but because you're human. Our brains protect us from alienation, especially alienation from groups where we find identity, belonging, safety. And they do that, our brains do that by shaping our thinking carefully. If being honest about something, for example, were to run the risk of an early Homo sapiens being kicked out of a cave they shared with other Homo sapiens where they were safe, if they were going to be kicked out into the wilds of the night, their brain, preferring to keep them safely accepted in the group dynamic, safe in that cave, would instead squelch their honest take on things and conjure thoughts marked by confirmation bias and motivated reasoning. Thoughts that would allow them to agree, even when they really didn't. All of us, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, we all ultimately want the same things. We want to be safe. We want to be happy. We want our loved ones and like our affinity groups that we identify with, we want them all to be safe and happy too. And these rights are self-evident. We said it in our Declaration of Independence. We want our fair share of resources and opportunities for us and our people. We want our kids to have a good future. We want freedom and dignity. And we are assured in our respective echo chambers that the other side threatens all of that. And then at some point, we become intellectually captured by our group. Confirmation bias, motivated reasoning mean that we give our side the benefit of the doubt. Because if our own side is corrupt, if it's dishonest, or if it's abusing power, that creates a terrible problem for us. Where are we supposed to go? Are we supposed to go into the arms of the other side, the side we've learned to fully distrust, maybe even hate? That's unlikely. So instead, we feel compelled to desperately look for evidence that confirms what we need to believe about our party. And our modern media landscape has created entire networks that feed us the cognitive slop we need to feel good about it. Our side must be the good guys in this clumsy American duality. And if you'll reassure me that they are, then I'll watch your ads and you'll make money off of me. And now, we're not just members of the party, we're captives to it, intellectually speaking. And when the masses find themselves thoroughly captivated, thoroughly captured intellectually, then our civilization's immunity from bond-destroying cultural toxins is at its weakest. And as I said earlier, we become ripe for tyranny. No matter how much you want to trust your political party, history has shown clearly that neither the political left nor the political right has ever been immune from infiltration by really bad actors. Politics isn't a line where everything on one side is good and everything on the other side is bad. That is fat pencil civics, like I was talking about earlier. Politics is a bell curve where the mainstream left and right are in agreement there in the middle of the bell curve on foundational things that are those things that keep our nation from coming apart at the seams. Ideals that we all have to share for this to work, like we should always respect the will of the voters, or we should always have a peaceful transfer of power when someone else wins a position. Things like Congress should always work toward consensus for our benefit, no matter who's in charge, things like that. But as you slide down the two ends of the curve to the extremes on both the left and the right, that's where you find dangerous ideas and a willingness, actually even an eagerness among the most civically destructive personalities to scrap the very mechanics of democracy that allow us to elect our leaders and hold them accountable to live in peace and settle our differences without violence. Ballots, not bullets. Some of those mindsets on the tails of the distribution are more okay with bullets than with the other team getting to be in charge. These are the folks for whom democracy is not a guiding light. It's an inconvenience. They want dominance, even if it means trading America's highly successful experiment in representative democracy for some form of authoritarianism. They will kill the golden goose. And the edgelords on this bell curve are always trying to move the Overton window and pull more supporters to their extreme positions. The mainstream folks in the middle, left and right, they have numbers. There's a lot of them, but as highly partisan voting districts have become the norm, more commonplace as a result of gerrymandering, an unhealthy thing has happened in the United States. Tiny numbers of voters typically participate in American party primaries. Sometimes it's like 6% of the electorate. As parties worked to create safe districts for their party's candidates, it became easier and easier and easier for extreme candidates to run on a platform of party purity and win. If a little liberalism or conservatism is good, then a lot must be great, right? And there's no temptation to elect a moderate during the primary if the partisans know their district is safe for their party's candidate. So the edgelords on the tail ends of the bell curve distribution, they start winning primaries. And once your more extreme candidate earns the nomination in the gerrymandered district, the general election is of no concern. The other party sometimes doesn't even run a candidate because they know that the district is designed to ensure the election of someone from the other party. And since we, the voters, are in large part intellectually captured by one or the other of the two parties, we hold our nose, even if we're moderates, and we vote for the extremist from our party. And we do it again and again. We have manufactured this situation. If we're so thoroughly intellectually and morally captured that we can't ever abandon our side, then it's scary easy for us to become unwitting accomplices for very bad people who are doing very bad things in positions of awesome power and responsibility just because they're from our party. People who, if we're being honest, we would never associate with if we encountered them outside the bounds of our political tribe. And all that brings me to the subject I really want to talk about in today's video. Patronage. Patronage is a simple exchange. You help me get or keep power, and I'll help you get what you want. A job, a contract, a policy, access, stopping an investigation. Patronage is not a Republican or Democratic problem. It's a human problem. It's a potential weakness in any country, any political system. It's really just what happens when we end up with leaders who take care of themselves rather than the people they claim to serve. Now, I want to inoculate us here today from thinking patronage is a more prevalent problem on the other side, because I think that's how our poor, exhausted brains instinctively react to political critique that might touch our team. We slide right into things like whataboutism, confirmation bias, and motivated reasoning, the mental ruts that we know so well nowadays. The reality is this: patronage has been a recurring sickness on both sides throughout American history. Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall are the classic Democratic example from New York. Matthew Quay is a Republican counterexample. He controlled a political machine that corruptly dominated Pennsylvania politics for years. The monster slouches forward not when your neighbor puts out the opposite party's yard sign at election time, but when any politician discovers that political power can be converted into personal power, personal gain, and they make that deal with the devil to cash out their democracy chips and move into the high roller room where public service gives way to self-service. Now, we often talk like either liberalism or conservatism is inherently good or inherently bad, depending on which party we belong to, but in reality, either philosophy can become completely corrupted when a politician's objective or an entire party's objective stops being to serve the public earnestly, and politics itself transmogrifies from public service into nothing more than a power base for one person or a group of affiliates seeking their own personal benefits through a litany of explicit or silently understood quid pro quos. A party that at one time stood up for the little guy can turn into a den of thieves incredibly quickly. So if you're still tempted to gaze out at the American political hellscape and think, well, yeah, sure, but my side is the good side, I just need you to add 2 words to that: right now. My side is the good side right now. No party is intrinsically and permanently righteous. No party is immune to the temptations of patronage. Patronage is the Achilles heel of a representative democracy. Every time our politics becomes an arena of transactional deal-making, principles, even the ones underpinning the foundation of our very system, they become negotiable. You may be thinking, well, that's just politics. And I will readily agree that politics requires some horse trading, some deal making, but patronage is different than that. Ordinary political bargaining trades in competing interests to reach a public outcome. Patronage trades political power for private or partisan benefit. I can think of a historical example that beautifully illustrates a system fully captured by patronage and its sad consequences. And it happened not far from here. In 1824, Mexico adopted a federalist constitution. It created a system by which power was divided between the national government in Mexico City and all of the Mexican states, with significant limitations on presidential power. And then came reforms, and the reforms that came, they reeled in some really awesome powers that had been enjoyed and sometimes abused by military and religious leaders. And then along came Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. I often think about how lucky we were in the United States that George Washington was our first president. Even though he was lobbied to stay in office after 2 terms, he refused. And in his farewell address, Washington sought to remind the young nation that leadership was a temporary trust for service, not a facsimile of the perpetual monarchy that the colonists had only just escaped. He said, quote, "I have already intimated to you the danger of parties. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, is itself a frightful despotism." In plain modern English, what George Washington said was this: I've already warned you about the danger of political parties. When one faction takes power and then the other faction takes power back and uses the position to punish its opponent, the result can be a form of tyranny all its own. Now, Santa Anna was not interested in walking away from power. He was a consummate political opportunist, and he shifted his alliances multiple times during his political career. So after being elected president, he chose to side with the wealthy and powerful faction in Mexico City. And he abandoned the federalist system, even though he had run with them for the presidency. He dismantled the nascent autonomy of the Mexican states. He dissolved their state congresses, suspended the fragile Constitution of 1824, and replaced the federal constitutional order with centralized power. The important thing isn't that Santa Anna became an authoritarian, an autocrat. More important, more noteworthy for our purposes here today is how patronage turned a duly elected president into a dictator. After the suspension of the Constitution of 1824, states all over Mexico rebelled, and this included the rambunctious settlers in Texas y Coahuila, modern-day Texas. Now, people often think that the Texas Revolution happened because the Anglo settlers who were beginning to come into the state were angling to leave Mexico and join the United States where they had come from. But that's really not how the Texas Revolution began. Many Texans weren't fighting for independence at all in the beginning. They were fighting for the restoration of Mexico's constitutional government, the constitutional order, the Constitution of 1824. They wanted that Constitution of 1824 restored. They wanted it badly. In 1835, Captain Philip Dimmitt's men at Goliad flew a Mexican tricolor with the eagle and serpent replaced in the middle by bold black numbers, 1824. See, that wasn't a declaration of independence. It was a declaration, a political statement, and it was this: we want our Constitution back. We want our rights. They wanted representative government, not a system of patronage based in Mexico City. They were trying not to become like District 12 in the Hunger Games. The original complaint in Texas and all over Mexico wasn't, we don't like Santa Anna. The complaint was this: a government that's supposed to serve the people has abandoned constitutional limits that protect those very people from concentrated power. Santa Anna made his choice, and this is a great example of the danger of patronage. And so that brings us to Texas today. I'm going to approach this part from the perspective I know: education. I think school vouchers are a canary in the coal mine when it comes to emerging patronage beginning to corrupt a system. They're unpopular with many ordinary people, especially in rural areas, but they attract enormous support from the wealthiest political donors in the country. Why? I can't know the political motivations of every donor, but I do know that voucher systems create a very different financial arrangement than traditional public education systems. You see, public schools are a public obligation. They employ teachers who have to be paid appropriately. They provide services to every child, including the disabled and the expensive to educate. They maintain buildings. They operate transportation systems. They have pension plans. They make long-term commitments to the communities they serve. A voucher system is different. It takes public money and just redirects at least a portion of it into a private marketplace. That creates something patronage loves: a government-created stream of money flowing out toward private institutions and private interests. And that's where I think we ought to pay extra close attention. The Texas voucher story is very telling, and I bet every voucher state has its own version of this very same tale that is eerily similar. When the Texas governor first ran for governorship in 2014, the education platform that he ran on was called the Educating Texans Plan. Now, there was accountability involved, but it also included ideas about improving literacy and math, boosting early childhood education, and also virtual learning. And it included an expressed commitment to ending state micromanagement of teachers and letting teachers teach. It was largely friendly to public schools. Early in his tenure, this was not a governor most Texans would have predicted would make universal school choice the centerpiece of his education agenda. We had not at that time seen the chief executive morph into a wrecking ball for public schools, the overseer of 135 neighborhood campus closures in just 3 years, and the revoker of locally elected local control in school districts from Houston to Fort Worth. No one could have predicted the Texas governor of 2014 would morph into a guy responsible for the passage of a $1 billion voucher bill, 70% of which the state comptroller reports is paying the tuition of kids who were not public school students to begin with. A brand new drain on Texas taxpayer dollars. When the governor first took office, school choice was already a powerful political movement in the U.S. He was nominally pro-school choice back then, but it was far from a priority. He didn't talk about it a lot. He didn't do a lot about it. Vouchers were never broadly popular in Texas, and I think that was a factor. Vouchers in some form or fashion had been proposed repeatedly in the Texas legislature in 2005, 2007, 2009, 11, 2013, and 2015, and every single time they went down in flames. Another voucher bill was floated in 2017 when our man was governor, and he passively supported it, but like he had done during most of his governorship, he kind of mostly stayed out of the voucher fray. And it failed again, just like all the other times. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting. During his long tenure, a powerful force had emerged in Texas politics, and that's putting it lightly. And they were pushing harder than anyone for vouchers in the state of Texas. Ferris and Dan Wilkes of Cisco, Texas, and Midland billionaire Tim Dunn spent years building what may be the most formidable political machine in Texas history. They weren't simply wealthy conservatives writing checks to candidates. Those are a dime a dozen. They were different. They built organizations. They funded candidates. They poured money into Republican primaries, and they created scorecards in their own media environment capable of rewarding or punishing Republicans according to how closely they aligned to these men's wishes. Now, all three are deeply conservative Christians, although Ferris Wilkes' religious tradition is a little different than the other two men. He pastors Assembly of Yahweh Seventh Day, a fundamentalist congregation with distinctive Old Testament practices that rejects the Trinity and does not regard Jesus as God. According to the Houston Chronicle, women are not permitted to speak during worship at that church. Now, despite these men's differences in theology, all three are united around something very politically consequential for those of us working in Texas, a shared ideology and a willingness to put serious money behind it to advance it. And as time moved forward, they demonstrated they could make a Republican's political life in Texas very uncomfortable or very short-lived. I often wondered if the phrase, "if you can't beat them, join them," ever passed the governor's lips. His change of direction and intensity on vouchers was just that abrupt and that dramatic. The Wilkes brothers and Tim Dunn had spent millions working to unseat Republicans they considered insufficiently conservative, a key marker of which appears to have been ever voting in opposition to vouchers. That was unacceptable, or that's what it looks like to me. So through their advocacy, their big dollar donations, the Dunn and Wilkes network issued a message to Texas Republicans that was not subtle at all. You could have their support, their money, and their protection, or you could find yourself facing an enormously well-funded primary opponent and a panoply of organizations who didn't hesitate to get down and dirty, not to mention a little loose with the facts when it comes to mailers, online ads, and faux journalism. So by 2021 and 2022, the Texas governor was moving aggressively toward the universal school vouchers position that the Wilkes and Dunn network had been demanding of all Texas Republicans for years. And by 2023, vouchers weren't merely one item on the governor's legislative agenda. They had become his number one priority. Is that a coincidence? I mean, maybe. I can't say what happened in private conversations between the governor's office and these wealthy political donors / power brokers or their attack dogs. If anything, maybe they didn't even have meetings. I don't know. But I do know that in 2020, something egregious had happened on Texas Scorecard Radio. Now, you need to understand that Texas Scorecard and Texas Scorecard Radio are or were programs of Empower Texans, an organization that has since, I think, changed its name, but it was funded by just a handful of donors, with Dunn and the Wilkes brothers providing the lion's share of the funding, up to $10 million between them by 2018 estimates, according to an online article called The Money Behind Empower Texans. So what happened in 2020? Empower Texan staffers Kerry Cheshire and Tony McDonald were recorded on audio discussing the Texas governor in hostile terms, calling him evil and a revolting piece of... Worst of all, the two Empower Texans officials also made very crude and cruel jokes about the governor's paralysis and his use of a wheelchair. The Brain Trust at Texas Scorecard Radio then released the audio online. The governor responded quickly. He denounced the audio, and days later, he opposed candidates that were aligned with Empower Texans and Dunn and Wilkes. And then over the next couple of years, though, something unexpected happened. His political trajectory began moving dramatically toward the agenda of the very political network that had once treated him as an enemy. Now, maybe his convictions just genuinely and kind of randomly changed all of a sudden. Whispers among a lot of Texas educators attributed the shift to a rumor that the governor was considering a presidential run and he wanted to get in good with the national school choice kingmakers because they had a lot of money to donate. I don't know any of that, but I do know this. The poor guy had watched the Wilkes-Dunn machine spend millions to defeat Republicans who crossed it. He had seen what happened to politicians who refused to fall in line, and he heard with his own ears what they were saying about him behind the scenes on a hot mic. For whatever reason, the governor went all in on vouchers in Texas, and he was uncharacteristically aggressive about it. He made it clear that no one better stand in his way on the voucher issue. Many rural Republicans resisted anyway, especially in the House of Representatives. These Republicans told their governor from their same party, look, our constituents don't want vouchers. We've been listening to them. Representative Glenn Rogers in Palapena County, a good friend of mine, he would later quote the one and only David Crockett and say that he would wear no man's collar. But the biggest money and influence machine in Texas Republican politics, well, it wanted vouchers, and it wanted them badly. In 2023, the governor told the Mavericks in his party that he would not sign a school funding bill if they didn't get on board with his voucher bill. If it didn't pass, there would be no school funding. Inflation was squeezing schools at this time, so this was not a minor threat. The situation had morphed quickly from vanilla politics to hardball politics and then to something else entirely. It became an exercise in cold-blooded leverage where local classrooms and children's educational programs were held over a cliff until the state and the billionaires got what they badly wanted. The governor traveled all over the state promoting the voucher bill, speaking at private schools, sometimes with visibly uncomfortable rural representatives standing beside him. The legislature, nonetheless, rejected the voucher proposal during the regular session, with no votes even coming from some of the representatives who had stood alongside the governor during his barnstorming pro-voucher trip around Texas. For many serving Texas educators, it was glorious to see representatives still representing the wishes of their communities, their constituents, even in the face of intense pressure. But the governor made good on his threat. Every public school in the state of Texas failed to receive a funding boost during that legislative session, despite historic inflation driving up costs dramatically, not to mention the every year cost of just normal staff raises. Campuses began to close around the state. Teachers lost their jobs. Student programs that weren't absolutely necessary closed down in many cases. The governor didn't give up on vouchers either. He was all in. So he called lawmakers back for a special session. Then he did it again and again. His fourth special session proclamation in November 2023 explicitly included legislation establishing an educational savings account program, aka school vouchers, tax dollars to private schools. And this is where the patronage question gets really interesting to me. The Wilkes-Dunn machine wanted vouchers. Rural Republicans, hearing from their constituents, they couldn't go along. Most of them anyway. Some of them did. They weren't opposing vouchers because they were liberals or they were against the governor. These were rock-ribbed rural Republicans, many of whom had voted right along with the governor's wishes their whole careers. But they were representing constituents who didn't want the policy. They were between a rock and a hard place. The priority of the Wilkes-Dunn machine didn't match what a large number of rural Texans felt served their best interests. They didn't want their schools put at risk. So you had this unusual intra-party conflict. A Republican governor was pushing a Republican policy against Republican legislators who were representing Republican voters in Republican districts. And then something else happened, something interesting as well. Jeff Yass, a billionaire TikTok investor from Pennsylvania, of all places, and a major school choice advocate and private school donor, he gave the Texas governor $6 million. At the time, reportedly, it was the largest single political donation in Texas political history. That donation came at a key moment, the precise moment the Republican House members who had opposed the voucher bill were being targeted. Yass later gave another $4 million. Perhaps coincidentally, around the same time the governor received this donation from Pennsylvania, he spent $4.4 million helping primary opponents against the incumbent Republicans who had voted against the voucher bill. The governor personally hit the campaign trail for these new recruits. Incumbency be darned. The all-out voucher blitz against fellow Republicans, well, it worked. The targeted representatives all lost except for one. In 2025, Texas enacted for the first time ever a school voucher program. The price tag, $1 billion Texas taxpayer dollars. And who got them? Well, so far, non-public school kids and their families are 70% of the voucher recipients, according to State Comptroller Don Huffines. It's a billionaire's boondoggle. That's what it is. But the point of today's video isn't that vouchers are bad. They are. That's not the point. The point is what happened before the voucher bill passed in this state. A policy that had failed repeatedly for decades suddenly became a politician's overriding priority when it hadn't been before. Meanwhile, a powerful political network had spent years building a machine capable of rewarding politicians who followed its agenda to the T and punishing those who deviated from the billionaire's wishes. That same politician that we're talking about, he spent millions defeating legislators from his own party who refused to go along. And he personally campaigned against them and for these newcomers. Now, maybe all of that was perfectly innocent, but maybe it was patronage. Patronage doesn't require a conspiracy in a smoke-filled room, and vouchers sure look to me like an ornament of patronage. I see them not just as a canary in the coal mine, as I said earlier, but rather as a dead canary on the coal mine floor of American civics, indicating the presence of a toxin in our political midst. The question isn't, are Republicans good or bad? It isn't, are Democrats good or bad? Those are the wrong questions to ask. The question is much simpler. Who does this politician serve? Political power can accomplish extraordinary good. It can protect people. It can build things. It can expand opportunity. It can make life better for the population. It can educate children. But when political leaders allow the pursuit of power to eclipse their principles and erase their obligation to listen to the needs of regular people, then something has gone wrong in our political system. Citizenship is ultimately far more vital than partisanship when it comes to the health and well-being of our nation, and when it comes to its ability to endure into the future. I made this video because I worry that patronage is becoming an Achilles heel of American democracy. Patronage is a slow poison, and it kills freedom. Once citizens become more loyal to their political tribe than to the principles of representative government, the people who are willing to exploit that can become extraordinarily powerful, and they don't have our best interests at heart. Citizenship demands something more of us than choosing a team and cheering loudly and showing up at the polls. No, it demands that we remain citizens first and partisans second. It demands active participation by all of us in defending the foundations of representative democracy. And that means never, ever, ever forgetting who political power actually belongs to. Us. We the people.